welcome to a very special episode of PopCultX where we're celebrating May the 4th. The force is probably extra strong with all of us. And today we have a very extraordinary guest joining us, and that's none other than the brilliant Ethan Sachs, known for his deep dives in the Star Wars universe through his comic book series. Ethan works a span from gritty adventures of bounty hunters, which we'll get into, and also to the thrilling tales of Jango Fett, his newest work out there, which captures the essence and excitement of all these Star Wars sagas. So, Ethan, welcome to the show, and may the 4th be with you.
And you as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. So glad I'm able to talk to you today. It's a very special day, I guess, like we said, in the geek universe, where we celebrate both Star Wars Day, May the 4th, and Free Comic Book Day. And because you kind of toe the line between both of those awesome events, I'd like to know from you, actually, just starting off, do you have any personal memories or experiences that came across from May the 4th that you'd like to share with us?
Well, actually, coincidentally, my entire comic book career it can be attributed to May the 4th.
Okay.
So it is a holy day for me, not just a holiday. So basically, I was working at the New York Daily News, where I'd been for 20 years, and I covered this sort of geek beat. And for the May the 4th, 2016, I pitched an article that was for the digital side of the Daily News. I interviewed Paul Blake, the actor who played Greedo. There was a documentary that had just come out that year, and that was I always like to do a Star Wars related story for May the 4th. So I interviewed him, and it became this. I mean, I just couldn't stop laughing. He was just a very funny guy, and we were talking about who shot first.
Right.
Because I was the age where I was 4 years old when the original movie came out, and I remember,
Yeah.
quite clearly Han Solo shooting first, and obviously that changed over time. So he just was going on. It was almost like a stand-up comic bit where he was talking about Greedo's myopic eyes and I should have a flower arranger instead of a bounty hunter and all this kind of stuff. But he did say in the script, it says Han shoots alien. So for whatever reason, I had an idea that popped into my head and I could not let it go. And the idea was the murder investigation into Greedo and telling it like sort of like Rashomon, which for those of you who are not big Kurosawa, cinephiles, that was a classic Japanese movie, very inspirational to George Lucas, where there's based on a Japanese novel where there was a murder in feudal Japan. And there are four different witnesses telling four different accounts, including the ghost of the murder victim. So you don't really know who to believe. And I thought that'd be a funny way to tell that story. I just could not get out of my head. I was friends with Joe Quesada, then chief creative officer of Marvel, before that editor-in-chief. And we were at a Mets game, New York Mets game. And I told him, hey, I have this idea. I'd love to pitch a spec script. On the off chance, you publish it, I'll donate charity because I was a reporter and I'll be transparent about it. And he's like, sure, whatever, not enthusiastic. I'd never written a comic book script. I basically read a lot of them. And so I sort of reverse engineered the formatting and the pacing stuff that I wanted to do. I contacted Lucasfilm because I'd covered Lucasfilm movies and TV shows. So I had contacts, and I got in touch with Pablo Hidalgo, who briefed me on what I could and couldn't do. And I produced the script, sent it, and then for weeks I heard nothing. So I kind of thought it was dead. But then I came back from visiting my in-laws in Japan, and lo and behold, I got an email. When the plane landed, I turned on my phone, September 7, 2016. It was an email from Joe Quesada, the subject line being F Greedo. And the upshot was, never mind Greedo, you can actually write, and I'd like to bring you to Axel Alonso, was then editor-in-chief. And basically that was the first domino that eventually led me to leave journalism for comic books. Coincidentally, although the story never saw the light of day. But that is biggest. So May the 4th is a day I do celebrate because it was kind
That's
of like,
cool. That's really cool. That's very cool. I recall, I think the first time we spoke, you mentioned a little bit about that story, and it's such a fascinating idea because I can tell you this, I can't get that idea out of my head. When ever since you've told me that, I tell everyone about it. I told my wife about it. I told friends about it, and it's just such an idea that's so unique, and I would love to see that play out, whether it be an animated, a comic book, a film, something. I want to see it made. So on this May the 4th, let everyone collectively think and positively. Maybe we can get that done because it's such a great story. I really would like to see that done.
well, like certainly if they do a what if type
Yeah,
stuff, like it could happen.
yeah, definitely. I mean, it's just I picture the four different versions being told. I mean, 4 episode arc. There we go. Now, since you are using Star Wars as like your sandbox, right? It's your it's your plaything to create characters and bring joy to not just us fans, but also you're a fan yourself, I'm assuming. So,
Yeah.
what's been the most enjoyable part of delving into the Star Wars universe as a writer?
I mean, the franchise is so unique compared to other franchises across pop culture because every story connects. So like as
Mhm.
an example, um, the Marvel Cinematic Universe is not necessarily tied directly to the comics. So like,
Right,
if the storyline in the comics doesn't necessarily,
right, right,
matter in the world of the movies and vice versa. And what's unique about Star Wars is everything is a puzzle piece in this larger story. So like you go to the theme parks, or you play the video games, or you read the books, or you read the comics, or you watch animation, however you get in, these characters are all running around in the same galaxy.
right.
And so I think like the best part for me has been to create characters or co-create characters, excuse me, with, for example, with Paolo Villanelli or Will Sliney or these great artists, and know that these characters exist alongside my childhood favorites
Yeah,
like, Greedo
yeah,
or
that's
Han
cool.
Solo or, whoever else. And so, knowing that Tonga and Losha from Bounty Hunters may one day be in live action or in a video game or something, it is kind of cool. I had that was sort of a hard learned lesson because I killed off my first co-created character, also co-created with Paolo Villanelli in Wataku the Grim, who was in a 10-page Mace Windu story, an Age of Republic special. Like that was my first Star Wars story, and I was so
Okay.
excited. It was a cool looking villain. Uh, and I ended up killing him off on page 8 of a page 10 of 10-page story. So I learned my lesson. I think
Okay.
I learned it was better to pretend to kill off characters and psych out
Ah,
the audience, and then like actually turns out that they're not dead.
as long
Uh,
as you don't see a body, right?
yeah, yeah. Or even if you see a body, you never know. Like, hey, look, Darth Maul was cut in half, and he made a recovery.
There you
So
go.
yeah, I'm not even stabbing them with lightsabers. So well, actually, Kotaku was shot. Yeah, so never mind.
Okay. Um, have you had any memorable interactions with like Star Wars fans ever since you started writing the comics?
Yes, I mean, often like when you're writing, you're in a bit of a vacuum because
Hmm.
I'm literally this is what I look like when I'm writing, just so you can visualize it. At this very computer, at this very desk. So you don't always know how something's going to land, and it takes like 4 months or whatever from when you
Hmm.
write the script to when it's actually people can read it. So that great Valence Nation crew on social media, but also going to Celebration and meeting, some of the fans in person has just been so rewarding. They're so into it, and they're such great people. It's a great community. I think there's a lot of attention on the small but loud segment of fandom that is kind of negative. And
Yeah,
so
that's
when you
true.
meet the vast majority of people you meet, especially at Celebration and are anything but, it's
Hmm.
all love. And so it's just a great feeling to know that at least sometimes you're making them happy and other times you're making them angry, but hopefully they enjoy the combination. Um, I think like one thing that sticks out of my mind is I met a kid who was in seventh grade at Celebration Anaheim a few years
Hmm.
back, and he came up to me and he told me that he had, for a class project, made a film about bounty hunters and
Oh, okay.
shared a picture of like his mother as Zuckus, his father as Valance, self as Cad Bane, and his grandfather as Bosk. And the costumes were pretty cool,
That's
actually. He
cool.
showed a still of it, and I was like, that is pretty cool. Like I think he got an A. So
Okay.
that's at least something positive I've done. So that I feel
That's
like
really cool. I
at
mean,
least it helps one kid get an A.
there you go. Well, I see you're wearing a Haunted Girl hat, and I know you recently did a book signing tour for the release of those comic books that you wrote with your daughter. Um, how was that? Could you talk a little bit about spending that time with your daughter, and interacting with fans there?
Sure. Yeah. This is probably the most personal thing I've ever done. Was a four-issue Image, Syzygy, which is an imprint of Image,
Hmm.
comic book series, and the trade paperback comes out at a bookstore near you on May 21st.
Oh, it does. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, and we are doing a signing event together at a Barnes and Noble in New York on May
Nice.
22nd. But yeah, we've gotten a lot of media coverage. CBS News, People Magazine is doing something on us, Mashable, and the reason is it's a supernatural horror story, but the real inspiration behind it was my daughter's real life
Mhm.
uh, battles with depression and suicidality and hospitalization. Um, Basically, at the time, I was actually writing Star Wars Galaxy's Edge
Okay.
in a hospital cafeteria, waiting
Oh,
between visits
wow.
to go to the pediatric psychiatric ward. So I really wanted to come up with a story that would inspire her and other people going through similar things to like want to live and
Yeah.
persevere and sort of realize that they're not alone.
Hmm.
So it took like 4 years to actually get made, and by that time my daughter had like gotten to a place where she could write it with me, and like
That's
through
so cool.
yeah, therapy, medication, just personal growth, like she was in a better place. And so, like we teamed up with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and the American Psychiatric Association Foundation. So there's like in the trade, there's like resource guides in the back, like help
Yeah.
guides.
That's
Um,
cool.
you never know like how, it's a small book. It's not like a Marvel or DC book, but at the same time, like going around the country doing some signing tours. I remember at Third Eye Comics in Maryland, I had a teacher come up to me and say like he bought some copies for some students who were struggling, and like one of them called the suicide prevention hotline in the back of the book. So I was
Oh,
like, okay,
wow.
no matter how many copies we sell, like that's
Yeah,
that's success for me. So
that's
like
really
that's the
cool.
hope, and then everybody who reads it, who gets something out of it more than just the sort of popcorn entertainment,
Hmm.
uh, is great.
That's really great to hear.
Oh, and I should say it's a killer art by our third person in our partnership, Marco Lorenzana. I do not want to shortchange him because he's equal part of the whole thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It is a great story. I mean, I have read them, and the fact that teachers are buying them for their students and using them as ways to connect with them, I think it's just really great to hear.
Well, thank you.
Um, and it's also inspirational too. I mean, if you think about it, not only just as for me as a fan, but also me as like a quote unquote wannabe writer, I guess, in a way, to know that those words can make a deeper impact than just, like you said, the popcorn aspect of it.
Yeah, and
So,
I think like as a writer yourself, like often, you know, things that resonate with you on a deeper level, even if you're writing a space opera or whatever, that can make a big. Uh, I think it sort of bleeds into the art,
mhm.
Um, a lot of bounty hunters was about trauma, and that sort
Yeah.
of was on my mind at the time because of what we were going through as a family, but also something always on my mind. So like
Mhm.
having Valance be have PTSD, you know what I mean, like an
Yeah,
social,
yeah.
like that was a major theme of the book. And then having uh Tonga be sort of phobic about Boba Fett because of what happens early on in the series, but then
Hmm.
overcoming it to be the one to take him down when her whole team is basically gets their butt kicked by him in issue 35. And like, so these things were important to me beyond like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if there was this kind of, fight?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, there was plenty of that too, but I tried to sort of, work in my own neuroses or whatever into it. So yeah, if it's personal, it comes across. I think it's deeper.
That's true. Well, speaking of that, are there any other characters or creators within the Star Wars universe who have particularly inspired your own storytelling?
I mean, I have to start with the core, the writers' room of the Marvel story. This era of Star Wars comics, which were all largely set between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So we spent like better part of 4 years on weekly Zooms together, and
Oh.
they became close friends, as well as people I had looked up to before.
Hmm.
So like Greg, Alyssa, Charles, and Mark Guggenheim, and then of
Hmm.
course the Star Wars editor. So like I've learned so much about life, about comic books, about writing, from those people who are generous with their wisdom, sharing their wisdom. So I would start with them. But also, look, I love Timothy Zahn. I sat next to Timothy for 2 days at the inaugural Muncie Comic Con.
Okay.
So it was like the two of us who were like the featured guests. And I was thinking, like, why am I the featured? Like Timothy Zahn is sitting next to me. Like, what bizarro world is this? But I got to talk to him. He was sort of what's the word I'm looking for? He was kind of incarcerated at his desk and having to listen to me for 2 days. So, but
He couldn't
so that
escape you.
that was a nice moment. Also like in my past life, I was a movie reporter for the New York Daily News, and so I got to interview George Lucas and Carrie Fisher about a year before her death, like when the Force Awakens came out.
Hmm.
Mark Hamill when the Last Jedi came out. I've interviewed Anthony Daniels and
Oh, cool.
uh, never interviewed Harrison Ford, but and some of the newer people, John Boyega and Daisy Ridley and all
Hmm.
that. So I would say, like for me, as someone who fell in love with this series, with this franchise as a 4-year-old, the chance to interview like Carrie Fisher and Mark Hamill,
Yeah,
um,
my goodness.
special.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, definitely. Now when you're writing these new stories, especially with Jango Fett, that's the new series that just came out last month, I believe, and you're creating these characters within the new series. How do you balance that, the creativity that you want to put into it with the established lore or story that's already out there?
Well, I very purposefully, for in the case of Django, in the case of bounty hunters, I had a freedom that, let's say, Charles would not have on the main Star Wars line
Hmm.
because, Luke and Leia
Yeah,
and
yeah.
even Lando, like their continuity is so, we all know what where they
Hmm.
were in the original trilogy and all this kind of stuff. So, a master like Charles can make that work. In the case of bounty hunters, it's like, okay, well, I can't kill Bosk because he has to be there in
Right, right.
Jabba's palace, but I can do almost anything else. You know what I mean? And so there was this great freedom with that. Even though like a lot of those characters were beloved, but they weren't, A-listers or even B-listers. And a lot of their story wasn't mapped out in official,
Okay.
canon. So there was that freedom. And in the case of Django, what I love about Django is, Boba Fett has been sort of front and center of the lot in recent years, including his own television series.
Hmm.
And of course, The Mandalorian is,
Hmm.
sort of the rock star of the
Yeah.
Star Wars galaxy now. Django, who is just as cool as either of them, if not cooler, in my lore, what we know about him in a sort of the official canon, like not taking anything away from the sort of the extended universe, but like is limited really.
Mm.
And also kind of his continuity like issues, if you're writing him, are not really going to begin toward till he's on Camino, right? So anything before that,
Okay,
where
yeah.
he's an established bounty hunter, a kick, like arguably the best in the business, that there's a lot of room to play with there.
Mm.
And I also love that era, like before Phantom Menace, because it's like there's signs that things are breaking down, but they
Yeah.
don't really know what's happening. So it was a fun world to play in, a fun set. And also like, as long as I don't kill, spoiler alert, like I didn't kill off Django at the end of issue 4. Aside from that, I had a lot of creative freedom. And
Cool.
I'm looking forward to people reading how it ends, because there is some pretty cool twists along the way.
Nice. Very cool. Now, you did mention bounty hunters. Now, do you have like an affinity towards bounty hunters yourself? I mean,
I do. Look, I would love to one day write, a Jedi versus Sith lightsaber battle. But at the same time, what I love about bounty hunters, and I've said this before, is just that they're gray. It's like a gray area.
yeah.
In this larger series that's good versus evil,
Hmm.
they get caught in the middle. They don't care if the Empire wins or the Rebellion
Yeah.
wins, because either way, they're going to make their lives more difficult, and they're just trying to survive with their skills and just be a little tougher than a tough galaxy. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so I kind of like that morally gray. And I wrote some of these bounty hunters maybe a little bit less morally gray. Like turn Zuckuss and 4LOM from these like insectoid looking killers to more of like a Bert and Ernie in space. Um, and so, but they're still badasses, but I just liked sort of the found family aspect of it, because
Hmm.
that's something that's been, I love my family, but I also have a found family of people that are major. I have a few best friends who are like, brothers and sisters to
Hmm.
me.
Hmm.
That is something I kind of, you're better together.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like you find your family. And so I kind of wanted to do that without being sappy or, losing the grittiness of the setting and the title.
Hmm. Absolutely. You did write bounty hunters for what, over 4 years, correct?
Yeah, it was 42 issues, but with all like skip months, it was just over 4 years.
That's quite an accomplishment.
Actually, yeah, it was about 4 years, I should say.
That's And looking back at the series that you wrote, I mean, was there any moment or plot twist in there that you found to be A, your personal favorite, and B, ones that fans responded to the most enthusiastically?
Yeah, I mean, I think the high, I'll say like highs and lows, maybe. Like, so the highest one for me ended up being 42, and like how it ended in that 8-page coda with Paolo. There were a close second in terms of a single issue was, I think it was 32, which was the Zuckuss origin tale. Because one thing we realized talking to Lucasfilm as I was preparing to do this sort of this one shot, essentially a one shot, because um, was that the GAN, the planet, and the culture and the species haven't really been fleshed out all that much. So I could like, this was our first look at that planet. So how cool is this? Like I had Zuckuss on my bed sheets as a 7-year-old, and I'm terraforming, if you will, his planet
Yeah.
and creating that lore, or doing it obviously with with some great artists, but still it
Mhm.
was like that kind of thing was cool. Working with Paolo, having him back for those final 8 pages of 42 and just getting to give some happy endings to some of these characters was also very special. I
Yeah.
think my two favorite beats, and I know I'm giving you a long-winded answer, but my two favorite beats was one where Darth Vader looks like he's going to force choke Valance, and instead he adjusts his collar because he wasn't up to Imperial code. So that was my favorite visual gag. Favorite emotional beat was when Tonga overcomes her sort of own PTSD to basically incapacitate Boba Fett, because he
Yeah.
had been elevated to a level in her mind, like she
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
having nightmares and all that kind of stuff. So that was my favorite, especially because that ties into my lowest point during writing the book, which was there was a lot of backlash to Tonga's like apparent death in I want to say issue 4, which
Okay.
was I couldn't really respond in the time and say she's okay. And it took like I don't know, it was maybe 4 months in real time for her to appear again. But
Oh, I
also
got you.
that was on one hand it was very depressing to me because I was getting a lot of sort of hate mail, but at the same time I was like, wow, people care about this
Yeah,
random
I was about to say
character that
that's
has
yeah.
barely been in the first 4 issues. If you only knew like what she'll eventually become,
Hmm.
um, like right now it kind of hurts, but at the same time, that's kind of cool.
That
So
is kind of
I
cool.
think I think that was also a lesson to me, like because I tend to be a little fast and loose about things like cliffhangers and implying someone dies, or like torturing characters without actually killing them, like Valance, like ripping out
Yeah.
Valance's heart. I mean, there's a story point to it, but at the same time, I took a little, maybe too much glee. But Paolo Villanelli, is more of a monster than I am. I maintain.
No, I've seen that on Twitter where or where you mention that and like you kind of blame him for every whatever he puts Valance through. So that's fun to watch that interaction there. Now, is there any moment where you were like, oh wow, maybe he went too far?
Well, all right. To be completely transparent, it usually starts with the writer putting it
Yeah,
on the page.
yeah,
So
yeah, of course.
So fair enough. I do take my share of responsibility. That being said, I collaborated with Paolo. We would have Skype
Hmm.
sessions, just talk things through, and so I and it definitely involved Paolo a lot in like coming up with the plots. More than often in this day and age with comics, it's kind of often like an assembly line where the writer starts, the
Yeah.
artist. So we were very, when you get to work with someone for close to 4 years, like you get that kind of connection.
Hmm.
Um, and so yeah, but there were a couple of things he was directly responsible for. I would say like the most shocking visual, which was when Valance finds out that Yura is dead, although she's not really dead, but as far as he
Hmm.
knows. And there's this giant skull, like when you can feel his mechanical heartbreak at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah,
And there's this giant skull, and he added that skull. Like he
that's
made
cool.
it look like just something out of like it's incredibly heartbreaking. So yeah, so he made it like so much worse. I'd interviewed George R. R. Martin about the Red Wedding back when I was at the Daily News, and
Okay.
George R. R. Martin wrote the books, obviously, and
Mhm.
his version of the Red Wedding was like it was so traumatic for him to write that he had to write the whole rest of the book and then come back to that
Oh
chapter.
wow.
But in that, if people have seen the TV show, his pregnant wife is not in that scene in the book. They added that in the TV series and then
Okay.
basically show her being murdered horribly,
Right.
like stabbed in
Right.
the belly and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, he said something to the effect of like, I'm a monster, but I'm not that much of a monster. And I kind of feel like that's what I would say in a relation to
Okay.
yeah, so like he wanted the Nexu dead as an example, Furball, and so I eventually wrote Furball out because he was just tired of drawing this giant Nexu in every frame, and it was just like a pain in his butt. So yeah, so he takes his share of blame, I would say, for the trauma that we've inflicted on the readers.
There you go. Fair enough. Now with new platforms and media constantly emerging, where do you see the future of Star Wars storytelling going?
Well, I mean, I think there are so many possibilities, and a brighter mind than myself would probably be able to answer it better. But I think, I mean, I think like for the time being, definitely the movies and TV shows will be driving
Hmm.
most of the larger directions. But because this franchise is so unique, I think Michael Saclane and the publishing team, what they showed with the High Republic and the great authors Daniel Jose Older and
Hmm.
Justina Ireland and everybody, Kevin Scott and Charles Soule and everyone who's come in the second wave is just that is been like they can build something big and they don't need live action or
Right.
even made a series to drive it, and they created something special. And I think at some point we'll see something else like that.
Okay.
It was just this incredibly popular, incredibly creatively strong and different thing. And so I kind of feel like that set the bar really high, but also set the precedent. And I think you can see that coming, from you can see that maybe being something for the future as well.
Gotcha. Now, besides comic books, do you have a preferred medium that you like to get your Star Wars fix in?
Like as a fan,
As a fan, yeah. Speaking as a fan here.
I mean, I'm somebody who's loved just about everything on the Disney Plus side of things, particularly, I'm a big Rebels fan, but
Okay.
also Andor. Andor has been like probably the single since Empire Strikes Back. It might be which was like the formative thing for me
Hmm.
in my life. I think Andor and to some extent Rogue One have
Yeah.
been like that's my Star Wars. I love that crew, as doomed as they are. I have a dream story I want to tell about Jyn Erso. And so that era, that side of things, that sort of
Yeah.
espionage,
Hmm.
they can't use the force to get them out of a jam. I just similar to the bounty hunters, like
Yeah.
I really gravitate towards that.
Absolutely agree. That's been my favorite as well. Rogue One and or of all the live action series, that's been the one that's really stood out with me, especially the way they told the whole prison sequence in Andor with like
Yeah.
Andy Serkis and whatnot. And that was just and then at the end when they reveal the larger scope of what that they were doing in that prison yard,
Yes.
that was just like, whoa,
He
that was
was
just
literally building the murder weapon that killed him.
yep, exactly. It was just so cool. And yeah, so I agree. Andor's my jam as well. Um, as a writer, do you have any advice you might be able to give to any aspiring writers who dream of contributing to the Star Wars universe one day?
Yeah, I mean, I would start by saying, because I do get this question a lot from people reaching out on the internet and things like that, or like somebody will say, like, I have the greatest Spider-Man story. Can you put me in touch with Marvel? Or I have a great Star Wars story. Can you help me write it or something like that? The short answer that is going to sound depressing is you can't start there. Like you can
Okay.
have the greatest idea. They're not going to read it. There are legal reasons they're not going to read it. What you have to do is start telling your own stories first to
Mm,
establish yourself as a storyteller, and so, but there's also another benefit to that. It's your stories. And so,
yes.
like, I think rather than looking first to be telling, stories involving other people's creations, look to telling the kind of stories you want to read, whether it's in comics or prose or anything else. Start doing that yourself. Come up with your own ideas. If you want to be in the comics, try to maybe use like a web-based, showcase it online, because there are plenty of creators who've started off basically without any kind of following, used tools that are readily available to build their own online
Hmm.
comics. That
Hmm.
gets seen by someone. Maybe that gets published, in print, and that leads to other things. And
Yeah.
so, the best thing you can do is show how you can tell stories, and eventually they'll find you, or you can have something to bring to show to, like, on portfolio days at a convention or
Yeah.
things like that. But you can't go from point A to point E first. Like, you have to go to point B
Yeah.
first. You have to establish yourself that you can do this. And not only that, you'll get better as you do that. Like,
That's
the
true.
more you do that, so that by the time you have the opportunity, you will nail it, because like you're getting out the mistakes, you're getting out you're learning.
You're
And that's,
refining your approach. Yeah,
yeah.
definitely.
I mean, I wrote for 20 years for a newspaper before I wrote my first comic script. And you could say, well, that's not related at all, except they knew me from that.
Hmm.
I learned about deadlines. I learned about how people talk. I learned, all these things that then when I wrote my first script, I'd read a million scripts. I was more prepared than if I had, just sort of rolled out at 21 and, sent in a script or whatever.
That's great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Now, as we're wrapping up this special episode of Pop Cult X for May the 4th, celebrating Star Wars Day, do you have any parting thoughts or special message that you'd like to share with the Star Wars community right here on Pop Cult X?
Yeah, I just want to say, because sometimes I alluded to this earlier, but sometimes I feel like the conversation is hijacked sometimes by some kind of toxic commentators, and a lot of the way social media works is if there's outrage, it's sort of it's you can monetize like YouTube hits and things like that. I just want people to remember there should be something for everybody in Star Wars. It should be inclusive, and
Absolutely.
I mean that in terms of gender, and in terms of gender identity, and in terms of sexuality, in terms of racial dynamics, everything. Like there should really, like, this is a beautiful galaxy, as dangerous as it is for people who actually live in it, but it should really reflect and give something to everybody. And so if there is something you don't particularly like, you don't necessarily have to feel obligated to crap on it if other people like it. And I think you just need to remember, if there's something that you love in this wonderful franchise, embrace it. And if there's something it may not be for you mainly, that's fine too. There's something for everybody. There really is. Like, my daughter's into parts of Star Wars that I love as well, but not as much as, my original trilogy. That was my childhood, my childhood blankie, so I just remember, like, we're all in this together, and just, you don't have to necessarily be supportive of everything, but at the same time, try not to be a jerk.
Drop the mic and walk away. I think that's perfect. Yep. Absolutely. I mean, there's so much to love about Star Wars, and if a story doesn't resonate with you, you don't have to go online and dump all over it. Just move on. Yeah.
Yeah, and don't dump on the people who love it.
Yeah, exactly.
There's nothing wrong with them for loving something you don't. It's just
that's exactly it.
There are millions of Star Wars fans with millions of different opinions, and that's fine.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better myself. That is just perfect. Well, Ethan, thank you for joining us here on Pop Cult X as we celebrate May the 4th, which is just a great, fun day for all of us who enjoy Star Wars to just, celebrate with those who also enjoy it, and maybe even spread the love to those beyond the Star Wars fandom, because it is growing into such a big event. I mean, it's reached out into more of the mainstream audiences now, I think, May the 4th. And it's just, it comes around once a year and people know what it is now. So thank you for taking some time to share your day with us.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And everyone out there, be sure to go follow Ethan on social media so you can learn more about what he's doing next and what he plans to do in future comic books that are related to Star Wars. So everyone, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.